Yeah, good afternoon. So this is going to be my first 6 months going through DEFCON Franklin, and I approached this like an ethnography of communication. So I'm going to walk through some of my initial findings, my approach to it, and my perspective, how it's changed or not since I started. My background, I was in the FBI before. I was an agent for about 16 years. In the last 6 years, I was a profiler with the FBI's behavioral analysis unit. And on that unit, I focused closely on obviously hackers, but specifically on online influence in strategic communication and cyber deception. It's a little bit of a different approach. And of course, it was constantly on our mind in terms of local and state infrastructure being vulnerable. And is there anything we can do about that? My current role is with Walmart on their cyber deception operations team. There's some parallels there and some not. But I've continued to do research in this space because I'm very interested in other ways we can contribute to making that infrastructure stronger. Probably this event in particular is what really opened my eyes to what could be happening with local infrastructure and what we could do. This is in 2020, the Kira ransomware group breached Louisiana school districts. So at the time I was at BAU still, we didn't know it was this ransomware group, but our impression was it was a foreign actor of some sort. And this is where I started looking at like, why would they compromise networks like this? And there could be a lot of reasons, which we don't have to go through all those, but this is where I started asking the FBI, the parts of the FBI and CISA, there are other ways that we can give the impression that networks are stronger than they actually are. The usual response I got is no, because access brokers have ground truth. I think you can argue that different ways. My approach to that was more if you look at the research on cyber deception going back just 5 to 10 years, they've consistently found in their studies, even if you just tell somebody or share publicly that there's deception on the network, that can be effective. That can be effective at influencing decision making among attackers, but even slowing them down, changing the decisions they make, impacting them physiologically. Why couldn't we do that with local and state infrastructure? Obviously, it was a little bit of a different approach because we're not typically working with state and local county governments and designing programs like that. But that's my background. My research method with this ethnography of communication and as a volunteer is really looking at this Canadian ethnography of communication by Duff over 20 years ago. And it was very much focused on how people communicate. And that's really what we're talking about, like how people talk about threats, how they talk about what they do, right? Now, Duff, the Canadian researcher in this particular example, was looking at how students in a high school and teachers took turns talking, how they communicated about different subjects. And that's what I'm also doing too. I'm interested in how myself and the person representing this water utility talk about this. I'm interested in how the people associated with DEFCON Franklin talk about this, how they talk about it publicly, their marketing materials, everything, anything that's communicated. I want to take a look at it, right? Because I think this is where we start to see relationships really defined and who really has influence, right? Now, I don't know what those boundaries are yet with DEFCON Franklin, because as you'll see, that's a little bit more of a black hole for me. What's going on behind the scenes? I don't know. So I'll tell you that's what it is. I can tell you about my experience with this water utility, though. But what this comes down to is naturally occurring interactions, because with ethnographies of communication, things should get more complicated, not more simplified, because people are complicated, relationships are complicated, and every situation can be different. That's my approach. Also, many ethnographies have gained more value over the years. Like it used to be, you've got to spend a year on a faraway island with a tribe, and that's ethnography or anthropology. Not anymore, really. A lot of people do ethnographies that are 2 to 3 weeks or a few months at a time. And this is especially critical for programs that have some kind of public policy or government nexus. This is from a study looking at government and public policy programs where they talked about a definable cultural community. I don't know if you can say that's what we have here with water utilities and DEFCON Franklin, but maybe something like that. It's something to keep in mind in terms of how I'm trying to frame it. What have my findings been so far? Well, if you look at some of these large scale national studies on local governments, it consistently has found, well, they don't really manage cybersecurity that well. It's not really a big surprise. This water utility that I was paired with is a small ski community town with 500 people. And there's one guy defend the network. So it was very small. And this is eye-opening to me because I've never really interacted in this kind of situation. It's not the kind of stuff I worked on before. I'm very interested in real and imagined perceptions. There's theoretical frameworks you can apply to that, but even your imagined perception of something can be just as powerful as your actual perception. That obviously plays in if you're thinking too about online influence and the perception of cyber criminals or other threat actors who are trying to make some kind of decision on how vulnerable is this network. I know, of course, there's steps that can go through to probe that, but that may not always be clear, especially if you're using deception. This is from the Network Defender. We're a pretty small town. We don't really matter to anyone in Russia or Iran. I don't think that's true. We know that's not actually true, right? Because plenty of water utilities have been hit. What was interesting to me too is when I was going through this volunteering process, I tried to be very, very clear with the DEFCON Franklin people, like, look, I'm not your typical person. Do not count on me to really go through that network. I focus on cyber deception. I focus on behavior. I'm not the technical guy, just so we're clear. And so I thought I'm probably not going to get selected, but I was. And from this network defender, he's like, the fact that you were in government, that really appealed to me. He said, I think you know something if someone took over our system. I'm like, I don't. This is a bad idea. So at that point, I'm thinking, okay, my own real and imagined perceptions are at play here in terms of what I can actually do, how I can actually impact this water utility as a volunteer. Now, this is interesting too. There's actually a famous Russian defector who lives in this town. And so again, another reason to think, no, they would be of interest to even a Russian state actor trying to compromise a water utility. So I'm starting to look at how him and I talk about vulnerabilities and how we talk about what's actually practical and what we actually do. There's been some pretty uncomfortable conversations that I've had with him about like what we should do next, because there are norms at play with this water utility about what they've been doing for a long time. And I don't want to just come in out of nowhere and be like, this is what you should do. Thankfully, I have a lot of practice with that from the BAU because every consult was with a different agency where we want to avoid being the FBI coming in telling you what to do. So I have a lot of practice with that, but this is constantly at play in terms of what I communicate. Now, DEFCON Franklin, you can't see it here, but they provide this tiered approach that's a suggestion of how you should work through these vulnerabilities. And tier one is pretty basic. It's right, changing default passwords, enabling multi-factor authentication. I'll tell you now, we're not even past tier one. And that's not me faulting that water utility. This is more difficult than I imagined it would be. And I've been surprised at how, I guess, deferential and interested this water utility is in my direction. And I have found that I'm very uncomfortable giving that kind of guidance because of this volunteering relationship. So every call I've had with him, which I'd say probably about once a month, we have a call, just him and I. I'm surprised. I'm surprised at the state of things. I'm surprised at the level of vulnerabilities. I'm surprised by things too that I just have never seen before. Like he signed into his OT system and turned the screen around while we were on Zoom. So I'm just seeing like everything kind of fluctuate in terms of how he can manipulate the chlorine levels. That's a first experience for me, but I'm like, this is what everyone's so worried about, is being able to compromise this aspect of it, right? And there are obviously limitations to what I know. So that can be a good thing. I found in the past when I was at Cyber Division headquarters, when I was newer to cyber, the fact that I didn't have the kind of expertise that other cyber agents had, it caused me to be in more of a supportive role instead of like, this is what you should do. It was more, what can I do for you? Who can I put you in touch with? DEFCON Franklin's been like that because we'll talk about a potential vulnerability. Okay, the supplier for this tech can remote in and do updates. That's a little concerning, right? We should pen test that. Well, let's set up a pen tester. That's more difficult than I thought it would be to pen test that aspect of it. But I think there's a solution there. But if we weren't involved in this program, would they do that? It looks like they wouldn't do that. Another initial finding is I have no idea what's going on with other volunteers. And again, I'm not faulting DEFCON Franklin because I haven't asked them that yet, but literally I have no idea what other volunteer experiences are like. And I think I should. I think it would be important for me to know. When DEFCON Franklin released the Hackers Almanac in DC a couple of months ago, I went to that, and it was a very surreal experience to me because I thought, who are all these people? Are they all volunteers? I have no idea who any of these people are, except some of the names like Jake Braun and Jeff Moss, who I haven't talked to specifically one-on-one, but I know they're running this program. So I'm like, I don't know who these people are. I don't know what's going on with other people. That would be beneficial to know, like, what might be a direction we can go. So I'm continually readjusting what's my real and imagined role with DEFCON Franklin. Personalities definitely make a difference because the water utility network defender I work with is, I mean, I don't know how to characterize you, just like a typical guy, just a normal guy. So we'll have even like periods of silence on the call, and that's okay. That's okay. Something changes when the DEFCON Franklin people were off the call and it was just him and me. I feel like we were a little more comfortable and we can just kind of talk through things. And it's interesting how he already knows what he actually needs, but he's looking for help on what he needs. This is a great example. This is I guess, probably a business email compromise attempt from a known actor about a year ago, or a little less than that. And it happened. They thought it was strange. Nothing further happened from it. I was like, hey, you should probably submit that to Internet Crimes Complaint Center. Just get it logged. They didn't do that. And eventually, after a few months, it's like, I'll submit it for you. Okay, we submit it. But to me, I'm like, this is pretty incredible because there's one ethnic Chinese person living in this town, and whoever spoofed this email or did this spearphishing email with this BEC attempt, maybe, was acting like that person on the planning commission. I'm like, somebody did some research. They didn't just scan vulnerable networks. People do care about your water utility. That really kind of stunned me. It surprised me. I know these studies about these nationwide surveys have focused on this idea of incrementalism. Maybe that's the way to measure and approach making these changes. The literature I've read on that, I tend to agree. That's what has happened so far. There's been incrementalism with the network defender I'm working with of things he's started to change. Some things I've been pushy on, some things I've been kind of soft on. In terms of, like, for instance, their password, they haven't changed it for many years, right? And it doesn't really fit the parameters you should have. But at the same time, there are like relationships and norms at play with him and his boss and other people that I'm trying to like toe the line there. And because I don't know what other people are going through in DEFCON Franklin, I'm just have to determine, is this going to be okay for this relationship? So definitely there's limitations here after 6 months. Monthly calls are only probably like a half an hour. My communication with DEFCON Franklin reps is really just administrative, although we've talked about we need to have lengthier calls in interviews because I want to understand what's going on behind the scenes. Otherwise, I don't really know, and I don't know shared experiences. So final thing in terms of the discussion, because I think I just have 15 minutes. Like I mentioned, we're still just at tier one. I'm not sure if that's okay or not. They're safer than they were when we started, but we're just at tier one. We haven't talked about cyber deception at all. My whole purpose of getting involved in this program was to look for opportunities to test that with volunteers of like, what happens if you do this or that in terms of what you project, what you communicate. I'm not comfortable with that at all. I am not comfortable with it. I didn't expect to feel that way, but I thought this will attract attention, and I don't think they're ready for that yet, right? I don't actually know if this approach with DEFCON Franklin contrasts what other state volunteer task forces have tried to do. Certainly, I see a lot of things out there in terms of people trying a lot of things, and it seems like there's much more momentum than there ever has been. Someone made a comment recently on like the policy pitch thing about DEFCON Franklin's problem is that it doesn't have an organization that's vouching for this program in terms of like, trust us, we're going to make it better. I don't know if I agree with that statement. But I think there's incredible things we could potentially do because there don't appear to be boundaries. It's not like other situations. If you think about this in terms of like incrementalism, the fact that really decisions are only being made between me and this one guy, that could be great, that could be very bad. And that's why I'm trying to be very careful in terms of what I recommend, because all I'm really acting as a volunteer is someone who's a consultant. I definitely want to explore this idea of boundaries in the communication process, because even doing this presentation, I don't know how DEFCON Franklin feels about that. I think they support me being candid, but I also know they have goals in mind. And does it make a difference if I say certain things? I don't know, because I'm not speaking for DEFCON Franklin. I'm just talking about my own experience. I don't know if there's any time left for one or two questions. Sorry to rush through that, but I wanted to keep it within the time frame. She had her hand up first, and then you. Oh, I do? Oh, okay, I went fast. Okay.
So you made a point around people may not want to work with DEFCON Franklin because you don't have a big company behind you. I want the cyber readiness institute. We have large companies, Apple, Microsoft, Mastercard, T-Mobile, Microsoft is actually funding a water utility and resilience program right now. And even with that big package, we still sometimes have trouble getting whether
interesting.
I do know that the Water ISAC does do a lot of outreach for us, as well as the WMA. But just trying to get the word out about these free programs that are offered, and sometimes people just don't trust the free program too. So I just wanted to share my experience along those lines. So it's not really a question, but there's a lot of ways that you could approach it, but I think a lot of it comes down to awareness and people to your first few observations. They don't know that they're not testing, right? They hear about it, but it's usually one or two people, and they're doing their day-to-day job.
Yeah. No, those are, I appreciate you making those points. I think too, like things we plan to do that I think could be very impactful. One being to actually hold a one-day workshop with the other water utilities up in Vermont to focus on things that they're actually interested in, which they've labeled out, and even bringing in like a cybercrime felon who can talk about when he looks at networks, these are the vulnerabilities he looks for. I think that could be hugely impactful, and it would take like this kind of private volunteering relationship and make it a little bit more public. Yeah.
It was just a comment. I appreciate your candor and your transparency with that and the approach that you're taking with that rural water. I've not heard that, not heard necessarily positive
Okay.
with other potentially DEFCON Franklin engagements.
I see. You've heard more than I have.
It sounds like it. I super appreciate it. Maybe it was second, third hand, whatever, but I definitely appreciate your approach to that. So
thank you.
I was actually at the DEFCON at the Arthur Franklin launch as well, so appreciate your comments. But let's thank him for his comments today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.